Doris Salcedo, Pellagra Muda, A Silent Prayer to Fight Oblivion. Created by Sarah Goldstein, Bobby Goodman, Phoebe Graham, Kayla Grover, and Kim Hashett. On this slide on the left, we have Doris Salcedo. She was born in 1958 in Bogota, Colombia. She attended New York University in 1984 and also the University of Bogota and Jorge Tadeo Lozano. Her main focus with her art is contemporary and conceptual. Much of her work is influenced by her experiences and her life in Colombia, and is generally composed of commonplace items such as wooden furniture, clothing, concrete, grass, and rose petals. On the right is the piece of artwork we have chosen to focus on, Plegaria Muda. This translates to Silent Prayer, which began with Salcedo's research into gang violence in South Central Los Angeles. Our group was originally drawn to Doris Salcedo because of how dark her work is. It is very emotional and powerful while still being creative. Plegaria Muda caught our eye in particular because it is so simple while still being significant. At first glance, it seems simple, as tables stacked on top of each other. Personally, it reminded me of an empty classroom when I first looked at it. Once the audience looks closer, the tables begin to resemble graves, and the growing grass adds another layer of complexity. After I noticed these aspects of the piece, I began to form ideas about the meaning of the piece. It was obvious to our group that this piece carried the weight of something more, and that is why we are drawn to it. Salcedo is from Colombia, which ran rampant with gang violence and government turmoil during the late 1900s during her childhood. The struggles of violence from a gang-run government resulted in many deaths. This piece, Plegaria Muda, was created to highlight the heaviness of many deaths. Salcedo has noted that her work is influenced by the deaths from members of the same socio-economic status, so the representative coffins all look similar. Her work is meant to highlight the effect of the turmoil and to discourage violence. At first glance, we were not sure what this piece represented. Seeing tables upturned with legs in the air is very off-putting. With closer inspection, you notice that there's dirt in between the tables. This is equally off-putting and intriguing as the upturned tables. A room full of these tables creates an environment that feels overwhelming and serious. The heaviness comes from the large number of tables, and the height created from the upturned table legs is overwhelming. There's also stillness and quietness in the piece. The white walls, the planned and perfectly stacked tables, and the angular nature of the tables creates a stillness and quiet, solemn feelings. The only moment of contrast in the piece is the grass growing from the tables. The tables seem an unlikely place for grass to grow, and the grass adds the only pop of color. The grass contrasts this heavy, solemn feeling of the rest of the piece and adds hopeful, optimistic feeling. Plegaria Muda is a sculpture created from 3 layers: a wooden handmade table packed with dirt with grass, and another wooden table upturned on top of the dirt. Salcedo arranges a large number of these tables in a gallery space for display. Salcedo designed the tables to be coffin-sized and all look the same. The tables are arranged in a gallery or hallway with stark white walls. These design choices emphasize the still and heavy mood of the work. It feels like a morgue or unmarked graves. Making all the tables indistinguishable makes them blur together. We think Salcedo did this to emphasize the large loss of life and represent society's lack of compassion for the individual loss. The live grass contrasts the color and shape of the tables. Salcedo used the grass to break up the seriousness of her work and represent hope in painful and harsh circumstances that lead to gang violence. The most obvious element of this piece is the row of tables. The tables are aligned in a way to resemble graves. Without knowing the historical context, the audience is unaware of why these tables have been used to represent graves, but it is obvious from their size and shape that they are acting as coffins or graves. The piece begins to look like a graveyard. The sheer number of tables included in the piece also adds to the meaning, implying a lot of death or loss. The tables are uniform and unmarked, which resemble graves where individuals who were never identified were buried. This adds to the meaning of the piece, allowing the audience to think about events in time where many lives were lost and many bodies were never identified. Salcedo uses this piece to depict mass casualties. On each table, there are pieces of growing grass, which offers a sense of hope within the darkness of the graves. There is only a small amount of grass on each table, which offers only a small amount of hope and does not take away from the overall sadness of death. But still, despite the loss, there is hope to be found. Overall, the audience can feel the heaviness of the death because of the abundance of tables included within the piece. The fresh, growing grass gives the audience a glimpse of hope, since new life is growing on top of the graves. Dora Salcedo had multiple influences in creating this piece. As in the right image, mass graves in her native Colombia in which she had visited, where she would sit with grieving mothers who were searching for their missing sons. A country would lose more than 2,500 young people, casualties of a vicious government, and what attributed to what Salcedo calls social death, or death in life. In 2004, she would also visit Los Angeles and encounter an area of gang violence that took the lives of over 10,000 young people over a 20-year period. It was noted how the victims and perpetrators of gang violence often share socioeconomic circumstances with groups all around the world that similarly lead to condition of increased violence. They are often viewed as lesser in the eyes of broader society, resulting in a lack of empathy for the loss of their individual lives. This social death describes their condition, where society as a whole does not fully accept these groups due to their circumstances, and governments enable this idea, excluding or casting out these individuals. Plegaria Muda is loosely translated to silent prayer. This piece is heavy, still, creating a seemingly never-ending maze of grief. One is at first lulled into a sense of security by the tables, which represent the intimacy of everyday life. Symbolically, these ideas, and consequently the tables as well, are inverted, creating an uneasy uprooting of daily life. The size and silhouette of shapes created by the tables, base, tops, and earthen center reveal coffins, surrounded by fresh dirt, held between like freshly dug graves. The endless repetition of these forms the idea of mass graves. The pieces are nearly identical except for their color. Each piece has its own unique tone, symbolizing the unique and irreplaceable, yet nameless victims. The artist is showing us how every death generates an absence, no matter what race or socioeconomic status. The piece allows for this phantom grief to be expressed and demands that we take responsibility for those who are absent. Between and through the wooden boards, grass grows like sparks of life. Through the persistence of life in the most desolate of places, we are witness to the miracle of life, and those profane lives to become human, showing us that despite everything, life prevails. Thus, Salcedo offers us a silent prayer against crime and injustice, a silent prayer to commemorate the victims, a silent prayer to mark the existence of those who have no rights, and a silent prayer of hope. As Plegaria Muda is intended to make the viewer confront the senseless violence seen in outcast communities suffering from social death, Salcedo's work is powerfully successful. Society has become desensitized to these mass losses, but her work creates a sort of memorial that insists the topic be acknowledged. By creating an interactive piece that the viewer must transverse, Salcedo requires one to confront the suffering and loss of each individual and think of them singularly, not as a collective tragedy. Not only that, but as one gets lost in the maze of graves, the viewer feels engulfed in the impression brought on by racism or status or socioeconomic circumstances, and the difficulty to find one's way out is unavoidably felt. The artist creates an accurate story of human suffering, creating discomfort for the viewer and experiencing circumstances their lives might otherwise shield them from. In closing, Pelagaria Muda is a clear representation of the many lives lost in deprived areas and seemingly forgotten. The piece is universal and timeless. In the piece, one can see the pain of slavery, of the Holocaust, of gang violence, or crowd shootings. Zalkeda has the power to make you feel something when you look at her work. Solid, dark, with glimmers of hope, this piece is no exception. Contributions. Sarah Goldstein contributed to the historical context of the group and learned who Zalkeda was and how her upbringing influenced her art. Kayla Gerber is the narrator and contributed to the meaning of the artwork and learned about the governmental struggles in Colombia and how the violence affected them daily. Bobby Goodwin evaluated the artwork using aesthetic theories and said she learned how influential one's experiences can be in forming artwork. Kim Hingush gave formal contextualization to the piece and learned how the socioeconomic status of individuals influences their lives or possibly deaths. Phoebe Graham provided a description of the piece and was surprised at how different childhood was in America compared to growing up in Colombia during the 1960s.